And we're back for another episode of Standpoint. I am Gabe Groisman, still Gabe Groisman every single week. This is episode 41. We're back in the beautiful Locals Rumble studio in Wynwood, Miami. Today's a very cool day because we are streaming. We don't do it so often. This is live as I'm speaking. You're hearing me on Rumble and on some other platforms. And in the studio with us, we have my friend Rosie Cordero-Stutz. And Rosie is the assistant director of the Miami-Dade Police Department. It's one of the largest police departments in the country. I think it's number 7, if I'm not mistaken. She is actually running for sheriff. It's the first time in like 6 decades that we have a sheriff in Miami-Dade County. The voters voted for it. And I was so excited to invite her on the podcast, bring her into the studio. Rosie, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
And by the way, it says a lot about you that when I tell you we're going to stream this, there's no editing. You're live as you go. You're like, all right, cool. And you didn't even really ask me what we're going to talk about, which is my favorite.
Yes, that's how it should be. Should be able to have a conversation.
Yeah, it's funny. And the national conversations these days are about whether people will talk to the press at all or not, because Kamala doesn't seem to want to. But local government, that does not fly. We're too close to the people, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Local government is in contact. But that's what touches the citizens more every day. So, I mean, if you can't talk to your local government, we will have even bigger problems.
Yeah, so you're the leading candidate for sheriff of Miami-Dade County, endorsed by none other than Donald Trump. And you walk in by yourself, no detail, no anything. Number 2 person in the Miami-Dade Police Department. And it says a lot about you. Before we dive into it, just to share with the audience, what I want to talk about, I really want to talk about broad picture. Because when I speak to you about issues on public safety, which I care about so much, you bring so much insight. It's almost 30 years, if I'm not mistaken. We won't comment. I don't know how it's 30 years, but almost 30 years in the Miami-Dade Police Department, in law enforcement. You're a cop's cop. You've done literally everything you can do. You have some of the most important divisions of the Miami-Dade Police Department under your command. It's really, really incredible. So there's things I know as a former mayor, understanding a little bit about law enforcement, and it's nothing compared to what you know. So when we talk about the biggest disparity that we see in America that affects people's day-to-day lives is public safety. You go to big cities like Miami or Miami-Dade County, if we talk about the broader county, and compare it to big cities like Minneapolis or Chicago or Detroit or even New York City or Los Angeles or San Francisco, the disparity is tremendous, right? Of like just public safety. We're talking about violent crimes, murders, etc. What do you attribute that to?
Well, I think there's something that occurred here in our community decades ago that actually is probably at the foundation of to why we've been able to do it better than most big cities. And it was really it comes out of our riots in the 80s here in our community. We had riots that came out of police-involved activity, right? Much as we saw several summers ago with the Floyd incident, right? So what happened back then here, if you're not familiar with our history, we had the Lozano riots here, right? Directly based on police action that was taken. And from that, as a department, we learned several valuable lessons, but that we applied. One of them being we don't do it in a vacuum. Law enforcement does not solve crime or lower the crime rate by themselves. They have to work with their community and their community partnership. And you have to identify leaders in the community that are willing to step up and be those liaisons. So we started those things. Secondly, is our collaboration with our fellow law enforcement in this county. We, as a police department, we're the largest, like you said, 7th in the United States. But we have 34 municipalities in this county that we work alongside every single day, including the city of Miami, right? That we're a huge department, wonderful reputation. But to be able to consider ourselves brothers at arms every single day, even though we're wearing different colored uniforms, right? Is important. I've traveled this country professionally. I've seen other departments. It's something that we do very well, collaborate with each other. So power numbers, right? And power number in regards to also the thought process, right? Because when we're serving our communities and we're doing something really good, we can easily pick up the phone and say, hey, listen, I heard about you guys doing this event, this project, this, whatever it is. We really like it. Can we tap in? Can we join? How can we become partners? And we've done that over the years. We've got a great collaborative group date. It's Miami-Dade Miami-Dade Chiefs of Police.
Yeah,
That's a proper name.
I've presented in
mouthful.
front of them before.
Oh, you have? Okay. Well,
By the
again,
way, pretty intimidating to stand in front of a room of like 40 police chiefs.
yeah.
I mean, unbelievable. You guys get together like once a month, I think, right?
Once a month to exchange ideas and to continue to build our relationships as professionals, right? So again, we're not reaching out to each other in crisis. Gabe, we're already talking every single day. It's imperative. And I think those are foundational pieces that have spoken to our successes.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's so much I want to dive into on what you're talking about, but I do want to pinpoint on one thing first, which is there seems to be a big clash in some cities between law enforcement on one side and community on the other, where they're almost against each other. And also in other communities, sometimes it's those same communities where there's a big difference. There's a clash between law enforcement and the elected officials, where elected officials, mayors, governors, etc., look at law enforcement as almost the enemy as opposed to someone that's part of their team.
Yeah.
First of all, do you agree with that? And second, why is that so different down here? Because it does feel so different in Miami.
I do see that as well. Like everybody else, I see those separations. I think often law enforcement doesn't do a good enough job in communicating the why as to why we do certain things. Look, let's be real. Law enforcement is not a pretty profession. The actions that we don't get called to every fun time. It's usually the worst of times that we're responding to. So number one, you have this association of that whenever something is bad going on, here's the police. So our interaction in that moment is critical. It's critical as a department. It's critical for our profession because every uniform, one action, as we well know, one officer takes a bad action and it affects this entire profession. And it breaks away at the trust of our community. So I think we have to work even harder to regain that trust and to continue and to build that trust. And so when you don't have that, I think that's where you get these silos of, well, they're clearly the enemy because one, we don't know what they're doing, right? And we don't know why they're doing the things that they're doing. And it looks awful. Why, so you have to be able to bridge that gap. And that only happens through communication. And it happens through, but again, not in times of crisis. When there is what is perceived a bad incident with law enforcement, right? Do you think anyone's going to believe anything? Well, we do this because no, it sounds like a justification for your actions.
Right.
But if I've been explaining it to my community for months or years prior to, and it happens, and I come back and I can now say, this is why it occurred. Remember, we talked about this. Then there's some trust there.
Right. Listen, the philosophies on policing are very distinct and very different. You see how different cities use their police, where they use it prophylactically. You're putting cops out on the street in case something happens versus reactively, and you see that, and that comes from leadership, whether it's elected or an elected sheriff or a director or a police chief, and then whoever they report to. But we've been seeing riots on the streets, these violent protests week after week. In the last few months, it's almost always about Israel and against Jews, etc. But what's interesting to me from a law enforcement standpoint, in a negative way, but what's interesting to me is how different law enforcement agencies enforce their laws. And they all do it selectively, it seems like. In the DC riots, which just happened when Prime Minister Netanyahu was speaking, and they were riots, they were burning American flags and defacing American monuments and being violent with police officers and calling for the genocide of Jews. For me, that's a riot. I don't care what anybody else says. Law enforcement just seemed to be standing there. And by the way, they were proud of themselves that the next day they cleaned up with the Park Service so quickly, they were able to clean. They say, oh, look, it looks like nothing happened here. And everyone who was arrested was released that night, if I'm not mistaken. Who's making those decisions? Who's making that decision to say, these guys, we're going to let them be violent versus another group of people, we're going to go against them? Like, where is that decision happening? Well,
we talked about how government and police interact, right? And I would tell you that is an example of when what may be perceived as politics, for lack of a better term, starts to really affect police work. So law enforcement's role should be safety and security. We should be protecting the rights, especially the constitutional rights of our citizens, right? So, of course, we in law enforcement should be protecting people and giving them their platform to speak their freedom of speech. However, that is not a blanket to break the law. It is not a blanket to intimidate others. It is not like a pass to do things that are inciting and against any people. In the state of Florida, we have some laws that now are on our side to help us enforce that. But that's it. We have the laws to help us enforce those bits and pieces. That doesn't mean that those are the same laws across this country. And I don't know what the laws are specific in Washington for that.
No, but that's right. Those are the laws. But then there's the policy. So before an incident's happening, there's going to be a meeting between law enforcement command, right? For sure. Saying, hey, this incident's happening. We're expecting 10,000 people, 5,000 people. Is the police chief saying, do you think, is the police chief saying in these incidents all over the country, not even one specific one? I mean, if you have insight, share it. But is the police chief saying, look, guys, we know our mayor doesn't want us to be too tough on this? Is the mayor going in there and putting pressure? I mean, where does this typically come from?
I would argue that maybe a little bit of both of those things are happening. Let's not forget that in many of those cities, the mayor is the boss of the police chief. So it's like anything else in life, right? If your boss is hanging over you saying, don't do that, then you know what the repercussions are if you go against those orders. That's why I am a proponent of having an independent office of the sheriff that you report to the people. Because at the end of the day, that is where the message is. Everyone in this country, this wonderful country that both of us have come to as immigrants, is the fact that we can choose to do things, right? We have a voice in our community to be able to speak up. But if someone else wants to put their agenda and use the police department as the arm in which they're going to affect that agenda, we have a problem. And that is what I believe has happened in a lot of those cities. Politics, agendas are being driven, and the police become an arm of that message being put out when we should be one goal only: the safety of our community, all of our citizens, regardless, right? Yeah. All across the board. That is our job. And so I think it's so important to be able to understand the difference. I will disagree with you, but as a law enforcement person, I will stand in front of you to give you your right to speak what is your freedom of speech in this country. But I'm also not going to let you break the law against someone else in the name of free speech. Those are two different things.
Right. Yeah, people are afraid of that. And that's such an important point, especially because, I mean, here now we're going to have an independent sheriff, but in most cities, that's not the case, especially in these larger cities.
Absolutely.
And leadership matters. When you're voting for somebody, when you listen to mayors and governors speak about law enforcement and trying to appease, especially the far left, saying, we have to make sure that all this nonsense. I mean, we even heard it with the new vice presidential candidate Walz during the BLM riots, where him and his wife were happy to hear them expressing themselves while they were burning the city down and property of innocent people who have the right to have a business and live peacefully as well. Mm-hmm. So that matters. Those things matter. Let's rewind, because I do want to share this. I think it's interesting. You and I met during one of these crisis moments.
We did.
And we met when the Champlain Towers, which is now 2 years ago. Am I right? 3 years ago?
Yeah.
God, 2 years ago. God, it's one of those things you put back, but it was a couple years ago. The building that I actually grew up in as a child, Champlain Towers South in Surfside, Florida, which is the town just south of where I was mayor at the time and where I still live. I got a call at 3 in the morning from my friend Daniel that the building fell and his mom stuck in the building. I jumped in my car, drove over there. It was half an hour or less after the building fell to just chaos. Yeah. When the dust settled, literally 99 people were killed, were squished to death. I mean, the building fell on top of them like pancakes. That's actually what they call the kind of collapse that it was, a pancake collapse. I'm not trying to use a term that's insensitive, because each of the slabs of the concrete fell on top of one another, giving people really no chance of survival. Really a horrific moment, I got a call from a friend who shall remain nameless to protect him because he's from another political party. He gets affiliated with me. His career it's rough, but I've got all kinds of friends. And my friend called me and said, Gabe, I know you're there. You want to be useful, go attach yourself to the families, because everyone ignores the families. Everyone's focused on the mission. I'm telling you, I've been through this before. And I did that. By the way, probably not good for my mental health, but it was extremely impactful. Probably the most significant week or 10 days of my life in public office. That's probably the best way to say it, because you're with people in their worst of times. And it was chaos. But the police departments, like you were speaking about, worked very well together. Bal Harbour has a department, like you know, Surfside has its own department, small departments. Miami-Dade County came. We had state agencies. We had people from everywhere helping out, and there was a lot of coordination. And you were there, and I saw you every single day, and you and I became, I don't know, friends is the word. You know, you look at someone in the eye and you know they're there for the right reason. Yeah. I think both of us saw that, that we weren't there for pictures and we were there to get things done. Absolutely. Tell me a little bit about that experience for you, sort of. It was almost like being in a war zone.
I'm going to be honest with you. I do think that to some degree I've blocked it. Like those, I don't think I think I was there 22 days straight before I took a step away. And when I say days, they were 20-hour days, 18 to 20 hours. Sometimes, like thinking back, I think like I probably, I should have not even driven home, like, because I was exhausted, and it's an emotional exhausted on top of the physical. But again, you're helping people in their worst of times, and understanding that even because the tragedy they were going through, there are no words. There are no words. You can't. But sometimes someone just needs to know that you are trying your very best to do whatever minor thing that is that they're asking of you, and it speaks volumes to them. I had one thing happen to me during that time that I think will stick with me forever, which was it was the end of the day, and we remember we had the memorial area that was a little bit off site, but for people to come and either
by the tennis courts,
yes, to lay flowers or something. It was right before that became an official site, because it started kind of organically at first, right? And it was the end. It was dark, and we had just shut everything down. And a young woman approached me, and she doesn't know who I am. I don't know who she is, but she is absolutely in tears. I mean, just devastated. And she's like, I have to get this. She had a note that she'd written. I have to go. I have to put it there. And I was like, it's too dark. The smoke, if you remember, we fought fires for days after. I can't let you go. It's not safe right now. And she was like, but you don't understand. If I don't, this is all I can do, and I have to do it. And so I pleaded with her. I said, I promise you that at daylight, as soon as the sun comes up, I will make sure that you get there. And she just lost it on me. You're a liar. You're never gonna. And I said, I promise you, I'm going to make it happen. I got her information, and honestly, I signed it to someone because, I was super busy doing other things, but I made sure that person made contact the next morning and escorted her there. And then fast forward weeks later, I received an email from that woman.
Wow.
Just saying how much it meant to her that I kept my word. And I thought to myself, that's my job. I couldn't let you go. It wasn't safe at the time. But, for me, that's my job. But you know what? Every single person in law enforcement has moments like that where you think what you're doing is so minor, but it meant the world to her that someone in her deepest, darkest just kept their word. If something as simple as escorting her to a place where she could pay respect to her loved ones. And I don't know who she lost, but I can't imagine.
Yeah, listen, the emotions were running high. And for people that don't remember, when the building collapsed, it was really half the building that collapsed. The building is an L. The northern side collapsed. The western side stayed up.
To rescue.
Those people were actually all rescued that were on that side. They were with cherry pickers taking them off. It took a little bit of time, but they got off quickly. And then the site was very dangerous because that side of the building that stayed up was not stable anymore. And actually everyone thought it was going to fall. They had put laser pinpoints on every corner to see how it's moving, and it was moving nonstop. It was dangerous. There were fires. and people couldn't find their loved ones. So it's not that they didn't know if they were dead or alive. They didn't know anything. And to see them go through those emotions of not knowing, even when they found out, because I sat there through many of the announcements, when there were pronouncements, when they were told that their loved one, remains of their loved ones were found, they were almost, it's tough to come up with the word of how they felt, but there was almost a sense of relief or closure of the moment because of how difficult it is to not know.
Yes.
And by the way, I've been thinking about that so much with the families of the hostages in Gaza, where we still have 116 Americans and Israelis held hostage in Gaza, and the families just don't know.
Yeah.
They have the hope that they're alive, and that hope, God willing, is true. We've seen people walk out. We've heard of reports of people walking out, but that pain of not knowing. I met with some families last week. I was at a Christian United for Israel conference, Kufi, in Washington, and I met with some families that were there, and I felt that same feeling, that same look in the eye from that Surfside moment. But I could tell you, Rosie, that when I met you there were a few other people, and we know each other from just that eye, because there's a lot of people there that are annoyed, that are tired, that don't want to be there, that are feel underappreciated, or that want the press. You were none of that. You were all business. And I hope I was the same. It's the only reason I was there. I actually used to skip. I would skip all the press conferences because I was not interested in doing press.
I was the police chief of North Operations, so I was literally, that was all under my command when it comes to patrol. So yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah,
we were there to do business, to do work.
So then when I heard you were running for sheriff, I got very excited, and I actually met with you, and I said, no one knows the politics of the first sheriff. And is it the first sheriff in
since
ever?
1966.
Since 1966. Okay, so we'll do quick math. Almost 60 years. Yeah. Right? So almost 60 years. So no one knows, like, how's that the politics going to be? But I said, I don't care what the politics are. I got your back because.
Thank you.
By the way, it says nothing about the other guys because I don't know them. I mean, I've met a couple of them, but I don't know them. I've never seen them in action like I've seen you, and I've seen you in the worst of moments be a star, right? Like really just step up. So I was really excited. I know my endorsement, maybe my mom will now vote for you, but you did get the most coveted endorsement of any Republican in the country, which was Donald Trump, which we announced in the beginning. Tell me a little bit of how that happened, the story. I know you've talked about it a little bit, but I'd love to hear it and just.
It's a great story. I'm going to tell you, especially like I said, I grew up in New York City. My mom was a single mom, 2 daughters, and she raised us, and all she could, we were poor, and all she said, your education's everything, and it pushed and drove me, right? So I tell a little bit of that story because when I sat down with former President Donald Trump to have this conversation about
future president also.
When I sat down with future President Donald Trump to talk about the future of this county and why I was running, which, by the way, his first words to me were, "Are you sure you want to get into politics? This is kind of a crazy business." And I laughed and I said, "Well, sir, I don't feel like I want to. I feel like I have to." And that's an honest statement about who I am and why I decided to run. So how did it happen? A friend of a friend is on his campaign team and part of that group. Someone, again, who I knew from my many years in law enforcement. So I submitted, my name to be considered for an endorsement. And luckily that individual said, wait a minute, I know her. I know who she is. And they did vet. They called people because I got calls from other professional, high ranking people who said, I got a call that says that they're from from Donald Trump's campaign team. Is that for real? Because they thought they were like kind of getting dupes. I said, no, it's for real. It's for real. Take the call. And so they went through that process. It was months, by the way. It wasn't like this. It happened. I just asked for it. And then he was here in town in Doral for the Live golf tournament. Yeah. And that's where I got the opportunity to sit with him and speak. And it was an amazing experience for this young lady who never in her life thought she'd be sitting across the table from him saying, please, I want your support because this county is so important. And I know not only with your endorsement, I get that message out. I get to tell the citizens of Dade County, pay attention. This is important. This is our safety and our security. And if we don't have someone who understands where we've been as a county and where we need to go, because as you know, it only takes a few years. All those cities were some of the same cities decrying defund the police not that long ago. And here they are now struggling. No, everyone's fleeing. No one feels safe. You can't go, enjoy. I would say I'd love getting in the car and if we're close, walking to an ice cream parlor with my family. It's something we do regularly. Every person in this county should feel absolutely safe to do that, regardless of your race, of your religion, of your sex, or any of it. That's my job. And so I'm passionate about that because it's so important and we can lose it in a moment's time. Open our eyes, look at the news, look how quickly we can lose it if we don't pay attention and we don't put a person who understands what law enforcement's responsibility is before the political responsibility. All it takes is one politician to say, no, we're not going to do that thing because it's going to look bad. I don't care that it looks bad. It's what's going to keep the moment safe and secure. That's my job. And that's my priority.
Yeah, it's huge because listen, there's big picture issues that people consider that could be important to them. And they could be very important, lots of very important issues. But just like in a personal level, there's nothing more important than your health, because if you're sick, God forbid, nothing else matters. You have money, don't have money, you have a girlfriend, you have a boyfriend, this broke up, you have friends. If you don't have health, you have nothing. That's why your health is so important. In public life, when you look at all the issues, public safety, personal safety, public safety is by far number one. So if we don't have that, we have nothing. And, we are in national election season, federal election season, with the presidential coming. People are talking about lots of issues. Public safety is one of the big ones. There is a lot of trickle down from politics into law enforcement. I was flabbergasted, to be honest, in my small municipality, small police department, amazing guys and girls, really amazing. I can name them all by first name and last name. They're all people I respect and I've seen them work, but they care what their mayor says, right? And the mayor cares what the governor says, and the governor cares what the president says. And so the trickle down, especially in law enforcement, is important. And now with you running for sheriff, that race, people in Miami-Dade County, and our audience is much broader than Miami-Dade County, but people in Miami-Dade County have to know how important that is. And for people who are not in Miami-Dade County, knowing who your mayor is and if you have an elected sheriff, paying attention to those races beyond Twitter, listening to long form interviews like this, look in their eyes, get to understand, because if you don't have public safety, you have nothing.
Absolutely correct. And so there's my message, number one, right? So that was part of my driving force. So when I get the endorsement, I also recognize that it comes with some negatives as well, right? Because then there are people who simply because of an endorsement want to say, well, that's it, I'm done. And then I would argue, I said, well, number one is the law demands that this position is partisan, right? So I have been a registered Republican since 18 years old when I registered in New York to vote.
You were the only one. The only one in all of New York City.
The only one. I may have been. But at the end of the day, my argument is it has never affected the service that I have done for 28 years. It wasn't until this running of sheriff that now it becomes like an important part of the conversation. So again, I would argue we have values as human beings. We all do. Right? Everybody. But to be able to say that I may disagree with you, but I will fight for your right to have a different opinion than mine, that's the kind of quality that you want as someone running your safety and security.
I think it's even more than that. I think that people who are Democrats in this country, the vast majority of them, they could believe all the stuff they want to believe, right? Have their own political theories on everything and philosophies that I disagree with many of them, if not most of them. That's why I'm not a Democrat. Most of them would rather have a law and order sheriff or police chief, not someone who's interested in all these other issues. Like, let them be interested in that stuff in their personal life, but keep me safe.
Correct.
Right. So that is what you are. And I think that's what that endorsement gives you. I want to ask you a final question. In our audience, I'm sure we're a back to blue audience. My family's a back to blue family. It's beyond me how someone would not back to blue. Of course, we don't even have to have the discussion of bad apples. If there's bad apples, they should be taken care of. That's obvious. It's like almost it's a silly conversation. Like, of course, if there's a bad police officer, if there's a bad anything, you get rid of them. You should have processes in place to do that for sure. What's the best way for just everyday people to back the blue, to show real support for their police departments?
Well, I think that start off with obeying the law would be a real, and we're talking about being obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's obey the law. Obey the law, number one. And when you have an encounter with an officer, and do it from a place of respect first, because I do believe that there are everyone. You may have your opinion as to whether you agree with the officer's actions or inactions. You're right to have that opinion, but in that interaction, it's not the time to have that argument. It's not. That's why we have other policies and rules. You can file a complaint if you're unhappy with the way you were spoken to. If you received a citation, because that's a lot of the contact that people have, then you can go to court and speak your mind at that moment. So many things. But what happens is you see it. You see it every time those videos that go viral. It's because it always starts with a place of disrespect. Now, let me be very clear. Respect goes both ways. And I think that leadership in law enforcement needs to be very clear about that. You give respect until someone gives you a reason as a law enforcement officer not to give them respect, especially if you have to take police action. But we should all start from a place of respect.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's all about relationships. It's all about, I'm a big proponent of community policing. People should know their police officers. The police officers should know the people. And even if they don't know them directly, if you know another officer, if you know someone else in the department, you will interact differently, but also the people will interact. And if police officers have to see the people they interact with at the grocery store, they're going to treat them a little bit differently, right? So that level of respect is important. And it's not just to avoid the viral moments, but it's to have more effective policing.
Yes, because remember I talked about how we don't do this alone, and that to be successful as a county, I think that's been a big part of it. So if I have a trusting relationship with my community, they are much more likely to pick up the phone and let me know when something bad is happening, because you're not omnipresent. You need help, you need intelligence, you need backup, right? So all of these things happen out of trust. And that's why I think that we as a county, we've done a good job. We can do better. We can continue to do better. But that is at the core. We have to have a good, strong foundation working with our community.
Well, Rosie, thank you so much for joining. And I know I call you Rosie because you asked to be called Rosie all the time. I know you have all these fancy titles.
That's fine. Rosie is
I
good.
Want to congratulate you for having a hoarse voice. It means you've been out there. This is campaign season. You shouldn't have a nicely rested voice. It's great. It means you're out there pounding the pavement. I wish you a lot of luck. You've run your campaign the same way you've run your career, with a lot of respect and doing things really the right way, straightforward, and just getting out there, pounding the pavement, meeting people, getting your message out there. And I'm proud to call you friend. And thanks so much for joining.
I too am proud to call you my friend. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining this live stream episode of Standpoint. Make sure to follow, subscribe, do all the great things you do to support podcasts like mine. And we'll see you next time.